Let's talk a little bit about why I think you should have an electric in your arsenal. And you know that I have all these different acoustic guitars and only one electric, so it's pretty important. It's a pretty important one. And that's because I find acoustic guitars to have to be very collectible and to have a lot of variety. And I find having one good electric guitar just about does it, but acoustic guitars have that greater variety, that greater collectability to me, and that greater vintage factor in a lot of ways. So I thought I would go off the top and tell you, meaning I don't know what I'll say, a couple of points of why the electric, why I think you should have one, but I've got a couple in mind. And like I said, I got all these acoustic instruments, like 10 of them. And even another one I was looking at, not to acquire, but that I really would have liked, that HG22, that very, very old Gibson Hawaiian guitar. So for me, it never ends on acoustic, with acoustic, and in terms of the interest. But on the electric, I don't even search for interesting electrics. I don't even that are vintage or anything other than this. It's reflecting off the headstock. There's not much to see out here. That's one thing about electrics. They're more reflective. But one of the first things at the tip of my mind, number one, but you can't go wrong with the number one. That's what I had today. It's rancid. But now we're talking about a list, and it's in no particular order. That's number one. And that is playing it unplugged for quiet practice. That's the first thing. Electric guitar does not create loads of volume. You can bang on it as hard as you want. You can get an idea for the tonal qualities that the instrument has by playing it unplugged, certainly. And for how it feels to play, you don't need electric components for that. To feel how it plays sitting down and standing up, and how's the neck and the nut width and the scale length and everything else you consider on a acoustic guitar. It's the acoustic guitars where you see the more extreme, prominent V necks of old. And on the acoustic, you'll see a shorter scale. Whereas look at this. So you might say acoustic guitar is more accessible in that way because of the shorter scale. This is more unwieldy, you might say. It's longer. Let me try to move this just so you can. I'll go to the edge of the body. So unplugged practice is you can hit it as hard as you want, and you won't be disturbing anyone. And it's loud enough for you to hear, and it's not loud enough to perform. And if you're performing over any kind of obtrusive sounds, like machinery running or anything at all, you're going to be drowned out because there's no amplification happening. So it needs it to be heard in that sense. It's amplification. But that's the first benefit, is unplugged practice. That's very, very quiet. Because that's nice. Sometimes you want to have that. Sometimes you want to play the guitar and only you know what you're doing with it. or you don't want to disturb your pets or anything. So you can do it that way. You can play unplugged. You can hear it, and the electric becomes a nice companion in that way, as long as it's one of quality, because otherwise it's like that inexpensive Fender Squier Series Strat from 1993. That one doesn't feel nice to play whether you're plugged in or not. It doesn't sit right. When it sits, it just wants to go this way or this way. It doesn't really pick a position. Nothing special about that whatsoever. But you could play that one for unplugged practice. What's the next thing about electrics you could say? Why everyone might need one? Well, for the longer scale, I mentioned longer scale, but also allowing you to play. For one, it's easier to play. That's another thing. It's physically easier on the fingers. That'd be step 2. It's not as hard or oppressive on your fingers, although you can. These also strings in particular, like Ernie Ball, they get dirty and dingy and filthy pretty quick, in my experience. And whereas you can put a set of coated strings on your acoustic guitar, like the L00, and those last for ages. But this, you might find yourself replacing strings to a fairly frequent extent, because they get these little bits of dirt on them quite a bit. That might just be Ernie Ball. That's the ones I use. But in general, it's easier to play. I'm kind of referencing the other day when I was kind of a little out of it and I ended up playing 3 hours. And the next day I had a lot of finger pain in that finger. That has pain anyway. This one. The first finger. So I was kind of, maybe I'm attributing it to that, the painful string. But in general, it's a lot easier to play. Then it's easier, let's just say more possible, to play certain things, like certain solos. You might be way up the neck. Well, then you might want, look at the way you have these here cutaways, and then on acoustics you have to think of the shape of it to where the neck joins the body. Because say you want to play your chords way up the neck, it might become a problem on acoustic unless you have a cutaway. Or this is a cutaway by design and you have a guitar that's pretty well balanced, although I said it might seem unwieldy, that's only by comparison. It's very well balanced. And you simply just have a lot more frets to really work with when you think about acoustic guitars. 14 frets to the body is the supposed modern take. You can find other 12 fret guitars, but that's kind of the usual. And there's a couple oddities like 13 fret here and there. That's not usual. So we think 14 fret. Well, you're working way beyond that, so that's that's one perk of the electric guitar. Access to the upper frets. And that goes hand in hand with the third thing, which is the bending. I'm not a big fan of bending on the acoustic unless I'm just bending kind of imprecisely in first position or something. Just that kind of to mimic the sound of a record or something like that. But otherwise, for serious bending, I'm an expressive bending, impossible bending. You want to do it on the electric. One like this. That's because it has to do with the tension on the strings, has to do with the gauge of the strings, the thickness, and the technique required to play in such a way. Another thing, I'd say number 4, I just thought of would be to play standing up. I'd rather play standing up with, the electric just fits better to standing up. This is a solid slab of mahogany, but with the acoustic, so it's naturally a thinner. The kind of profile of the guitar body is thinner. Then an acoustic would be, obviously, look out, an acoustic would be 2 or 3 times the thickness of this, or somewhere in between. The electric introduced me to playing standing up. Now I like the performers who play acoustic standing up. I'm just saying, with my particular instruments, I'd way be self-conscious about it's going to fall over, it's going to come off the strap, and it's going to have damage. Where this is my first guitar, I've played with it standing up many times. I know exactly how it feels with the strap. I'm the one who got the strap for it. That's the strap button placements that came from the factory, so it's not like it's just some random place. So I'm comfortable playing this one standing up. Whereas, say, the Texan, even though it's a light guitar, I would be having a mini heart attack just seeing that thing come off the ground and nothing supporting it, because that goes back to that other thing about the collectible thing. I find the acoustics more collectible, more cherishable. The electrics, you can be a little more rough with it. Now, that brings me to another point, is that electric guitars in general are not as susceptible to things like the obvious stuff. The humidity changes, the body cracks. Because just think of the construction of it. It's solid, SG, solid guitar. Doesn't have a sound hole, doesn't have a chamber of reverberation. So like I told you, it can be heard unplugged. And that can be a benefit when you take that into account for practicing and not so much performing. Although I have used it for the hidden benefit, a bonus one, of if you want to sing and you really want your voice to overpower the guitar, which it should anyways, but if you want to do that cleverly in a situation where the guitar might overpower your voice, switch to playing electric. The electric guitar. See how your voice sits properly in the mix, so to speak, without you having to get a lot of volume to your voice. Electric guitars too are this guitar is very well made when you get into the USA made Gibsons and you get a good one. I've seen a lot of complaints of quality control. But fantastic tuners. 2017 Great Neck, the 57 Classics. So those are some things to think about. The unplugged practicing, the easier on your fingers in general, and then the bending. What was the next one? The ability to stand up better with the instrument. Another thing that's kind of obvious is the fact that the electric one can plug into an amp, and then you, depending on your amp, without even having any pedals, you have access to all kind of special effects depending on your amp. And I like amps with built-in effects and stuff like that. I've learned to like that. There was one more thing on the tip of my tongue. I just forgot. Built-in effect. It was going to be a con of it. A con of it is that there's so many, since there's more aspects to it, outside of just the guitar setup, there's probably more that can go wrong with either the amp, with the cable, with the electronics, with the input jack, with the pickups. There's more that can go quote unquote wrong. I remember I made a lesson a long time back and I described the acoustic as pure tone, raw tone. And once you have the setup dialed in with the acoustic, the only thing that alters the sound drastically is you're playing dynamic. So electric guitars not being that much susceptible to a lot of those kind of changes. You don't really see the pickguard shrinking to that extent, forming a pickguard crack and those trademark acoustic things, center seam separations and although acoustics are susceptible to that, there quite a bit more goes into the making of acoustics when you think about it. Changing strings, the topic of it. It's about the same. And I'd say I prefer to change strings on the electric guitar or a acoustic guitar that's very modern. So that's saying something. The act of changing strings, I prefer to do it on the electric. You just go watch my video on it. Or don't, somebody's watching it right now. A nice, simple procedure on the electric or a modern acoustic, it's about the same. So I can't say one or the other is. I'd say a slight edge to the electric in terms of ease, especially you're not dealing with bridge pins. But that's not really the reason why. It's because most of my vintage guitars are acoustic, or most of my acoustic guitars are vintage. And you kind of can't beat these sort of really, really tight ratio modern tuning machines when they're on the top of the line models. I'm a real big fan of guitars that stay in tune easily and tuning machines that function to the best of their ability. Because that's always going to form a seed of doubt if you don't have it. And electric guitars do age. They age nicely. This one has the binding is aged. And this is my first one, so I paid for this brand new. The binding is aged to a nice yellow. They get checking on them and things. It actually has a little checking to the back of the neck. Yeah, you'll never see that, but maybe you do. They're a little bit slimmer. They're a little bit more tucked in. But now acoustic guitars, you probably have a bigger range of sizes and shapes, or maybe not so much shapes. Well, the shape, let's just say this. The shapes amongst electric guitars are more drastically different. You think of the BC Rich and the more extreme Gibsons that they were originally not taken on so well, like not received so well, like the Explorer and the Flying V and all the derivatives. You know, there's more drastically different shapes, the SG, the Les Paul. But more extreme, more otherworldly shapes, whereas acoustics you're dealing with subtle shapes, subtle differences in shapes and different sizes. Like you might have the Martin Dreadnought with its square shoulders. You might have the Gibson J45 with the round shoulders. Or you might have the smaller bodied L00, or you might have even smaller still LG2 3/4, which is 3/4 meaning designed for kids or anyone who wants a very small guitar like that. Or you might have a Texan with same body shape as there's someone walking by. Same body shape as the J50, just a longer scale. With different appointments, and acoustic gets really deep, and they all get really deep, but that's what interests me. And I mentioned you can sing with the acoustic and let the voice overpower you, but or playing it unplugged, but there's something simple about singing and accompanying yourself without any extra effects. And it can be cool, and then it can be cool to zone in on the effects and experiment with them. And you can only do that on electric. So let's think of where we started. Why you should have one. Why should you have an electric in your collection? Unplugged practice, where only you can really hear it and you can still focus. The ease of playability compared to acoustic instruments with more tension and thicker strings, and often strings with a different feel to them overall. Not always. Bending. Access to the upper frets and the overall longer scale feel of the neck. You can play your solos, you can play, and that combines with the other point of bending. That food was such slop today. Five would be the fact of how they're less susceptible to a lot of the problems that acoustic face, such as drastically being affected by humidity and being very susceptible to body cracks, because you can still crack the neck and you can still crack the body. The design isn't, the solid design is not exactly welcoming that, so long as you take care of them. Some of the cons were the lack of simplicity of use, the lack of simplicity of components. But this is my go-to, and I only have one electric and all the rest are acoustic, and I genuinely, that's why there's checking on the back. If I want to work something out, or just go along with the lesson or what have you, I don't take out the one I want to show off the most, or I want to take out the one that's the most comfortable. And that's this one, generally speaking. You know, some situations call for the acoustic, but that kind of little pretentious notion of, this song could not have been written on anything but acoustic, that's kind of foolish, because this is an acoustic when it's like this. It's just solid body acoustic, slab. Low volume acoustic, that's all it is. What do you think an Acoustasonic Telecaster is? They've got slim necks. You have to get a good neck. They've got slim but reasonable necks. I've played acoustics with necks less reasonable than this. I'd put this neck on my J50 before I accepted the one that's on there now, the late 60s. So it's got that slim neck, generally. And that's another thing that's easy about it. Slim but reasonable neck, so you can make your first position chords fine. I mean, just about as easy on any of my acoustics, because my acoustics tend to be on the realm of thin necks. The Texan's pretty thin, but not extreme. The J50 is very thin. I have a Martin Jumbo that's thin neck. The LG 2 3/4 for kids, so that in the grand scheme of things is thin. It's just that the whole guitar is small, so it doesn't seem extreme because the whole package is small. The L00 has a nice slim neck, which is one of the best, probably the best. The Guilds have a pretty standard neck.